You're very welcome back. Well, Minister McEnteen's hate speech bill has been approved by government and is currently on its way through the Seanad. The bill aims to criminalise communication or actions that are likely to incite violence or hatred against a group or individual because they are associated with a protected characteristic such as race, gender or religion. Well, here to debate this bill is Fine Gael Senator Barry Ward and Independent Senator Ronan Mullen. You're both very welcome to the programme. To you first, Ronan. You believe that this is a move by establishment circles, you say, to curtail what people want to say about controversial issues. Based on what?
Well, first of all, you have the remarkable fact that in a piece of criminal legislation, the central core of it, and we are talking about the hate speech aspect of this legislation more than the hate crimes dimension of the bill, which the Minister mentioned earlier. But at the central core of it, and at a time when there's major controversy around a range of issues, the gender wars and so on, that hatred is to be undefined. And that is remarkable because people are entitled to clarity, especially in this day and age, about what they can say and what they can't, because there's a great push on to curtail people's freedom of expression, particularly around controversial areas such as gender, as I mentioned. Parents, feminists, people concerned, for example, about girls being forced to compete against men in sports, men having access to women's spaces, so much of the controversial end of transgender issues. People
and do you
are
believe
very
that
worried.
Conversation will be stopped altogether because of this?
I believe that the really crazy new definition of gender, which the government has imported almost surreptitiously into this bill, and which hardly got any debate in the Dáil, is more than a coincidence. And ally that with the failure to define hatred. That's why a lot of people, you see, it's not...
Do you agree with the basic principle that we need legislation to address some of the really hateful material that we see online and that we don't have legislation that covers that at this point?
Well, if the government were to follow international norms and the Council of Europe, what they would be doing is distinguishing clearly between the type of hate speech that is so dangerous and harmful that it should be criminalised. But there are other levels that the European, for example, the Council of Europe, the Rabat principles, they talk about speech that should be more about civil sanctions or regulatory or administrative, and then certain things that are just offensive, but which should not be targeted by the criminal law. The government has gone for the extreme end of using criminal law to intimidate ordinary people.
You're intimidating ordinary people by this, who are just trying to have legitimate conversations about issues that many people do find controversial?
Not at all. And the first point that I address is in relation to the Council of Europe. Of course, the vast majority of countries within the Council of Europe are civil law jurisdictions, not common law jurisdictions like this. So there is a difference there that's important. But this bill will not stop Ronan being offensive. It will not stop him being offended. The bill does not in any way criminalise offence. What it does do is update the law. And the funny thing is that Ronan complains about there being a lack of definition of hatred, which is not strictly true, but the term hate or hatred has an ordinary meaning that everybody understands. But the point is that wasn't defined in the 1989 Act, which is replaced and repealed by this legislation. It's not defined in the corresponding legislation in the United Kingdom, for example. He doesn't complain about either of those things. The reality is that the Interpretation Act tells us that where there is not a definition, we take the ordinary meaning of the word. I don't believe anybody's in any doubt about what hate or hatred means. But coming back to the point he makes about gender as well, the gender definition does not, by the way, redefine gender in the context of Irish law. What it does is it provides
Michael
for...
Michael McDowell would suggest that it does,
well,
actually. He's not the only person who has...
I think Michael McDowell actually wrote back on this when it was explained that it is not it's not a definition that applies in any other piece of legislation. It is specifically for this piece of legislation, and it specifically and deliberately gives a very broad definition of gender, because the very people who are outside gender norms are the very people this bill is trying to protect. So why would you say gender is only male or female if you're trying to protect people who fall outside that binary condition of being male or female? Now, Ronan doesn't need to be afraid of that. What this bill is there to do is to protect people who are parts of minorities that are persecuted, minorities that are already the subject of hatred online and in person, already the subject of violence in person. Why would we not want to protect them? And here's the question Ronan won't answer.
Well,
what is it?
Question.
Okay,
all that
Ronan,
bluff that you're coming out with now will be answered in a minute.
What, Ronan, is it that you want to say that you think this bill will prevent you from saying?
Well, funnily enough, it's not about protecting myself at all. People like Barry and myself are politicians. We know the limits. It's the people who want to... Let's say you're a parent who is very upset about the fact that some bloke in a dress comes in and is brought in by the school and is saying controversial things to your children.
Okay,
and you
let's
want
just be
to let
careful
off-
about the language we
Yeah,
use and
yeah, but you see,
respectful
that's
here,
the whole
Ronan.
point. It's not that I would ever say this, but the ordinary person who wants to communicate their ideas robustly, even offensively, because they believe
Will
that...
still be allowed
no,
to do
no,
so under
no, I
this
don't believe
legislation.
so, because the problem...
There are
Here you are now
specific
talking over me.
protections. Well, you taught me everything I know on that subject.
Here's the problem, Barry. It's when the process becomes the punishment. It's the idea that the person doesn't know what they can or can't say, but that they might get a knock on the door from the Gardaí. People are entitled to express their views robustly,
Yes.
even
Okay,
in
but
ways that
just
might
to be
offend
clear, I
you
suppose
or me. The government is not out to protect that. They want
Okay,
to have
but
a chilling
Section
effect.
11, just to be clear, Section 11 of this bill deals with this freedom of expression. It says discussion or criticism of matters relating to a protected characteristic does not constitute incitement to hatred.
That is
So
what-
criticism or
that is-
discussion is not incitement to hatred
That
or
is
violence.
one of the sections which is weak as water, and which myself and possibly Michael McDowell as well will be tabling extensive amendments to this bill. And it's very interesting that the minister kind of says we're only out to protect people. Trust us, we're the government. I'm sorry, people don't trust that the government respects freedom of expression across a whole range of issues. That clause.
Ronan,
Sorry,
listen to-
Barry, I want to finish my point, please. That clause doesn't even reference freedom of expression within itself. It gives a very minimalist defence, which will not, and in people's perception, does not leave them sure. Remember, we are talking about criminal
do you
law here.
expect, I suppose,
People are entitled to know what they can and can't say.
That there's a-
and
there's
they're
a
entitled not to have the
There is-
fear
no.
that they'll get a
Okay,
knock on the
Ronan.
door
Okay,
or
okay,
be
let's
dragged
let
through a
Barry
process
respond.
You have to let
where the
somebody else
process
at some point.
becomes the
respond.
punishment.
There's a couple of points here. You've pointed to the fact that there is a specific defence in the legislation in relation to freedom of expression.
But there is a vagueness
Freedom-
around
which is-
what
there is-
hatred
there
is.
is
There
no
is.
water.
No, sorry. Do you doubt what hatred? Do you not know what the word hatred means? Of course you do. There's no doubt about that.
Why can't it be defined?
Ronan, now.
The Irish Council for
Ronan,
Civil Liberties wanted it
Ronan,
defined.
Hang on a second. I know they did, but they are just a group. You want to define it as well.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean it's
You're
the right
very
thing
good
to
at
do.
listening to NGOs
And the
when it suits
reality,
you.
Ronan, hang on a second now. The reality is, first of all, freedom of speech is protected in the Constitution. Freedom of speech is protected in the bill. But in addition to that, listening to Ronan, you think that anybody can say whatever they want, whenever they want. He's not complaining about defamation laws, which restrict what you could say
Which is not
for
criminal
good
law.
reason. It's not criminal law,
civil.
but it
You've
does
gone
come
to
with
the extreme end
Ronan,
of putting
please.
people in fear of their freedom.
It does. No, I have not.
Yes, you
Sorry.
have.
Let's be
And I'm
absolute. Now,
surprised-
Ronan,
okay,
Ronan,
let's
don't
try
put a
that you
charge
as
and
a
don't let me
legal
do it.
professional.
You
And is it
talk to
only
me
about
talking
getting?
over
Is it
you.
only about getting
Okay,
the nomination
okay,
for your
Ronan,
party that you
okay,
won't
Ronan,
call out with any
let's
sensible
let him
legal
respond
person?
to
It has to be a criminal statute in the same way that the Prohibition of Incitement to Hatred Act 1989, which is totally outdated and doesn't address anything online, for example, had to be a criminal sanction. That's what it's there for. But it's there to protect people. Nobody has any doubt about what the difference between expressing a legitimate, even offensive opinion and the idea that you're stoking up hatred or seeking to have violence enacted against people. Nobody is in doubt
Okay.
about what that difference
You
But
is.
to
don't
be
talk
clear-
about stoking up hatred in the bill. You're the same as the minister. She came in and tried to reassure us and said this is about people stirring up. Stirring up was in the 1989 legislation. It's not in this legislation. And this is the duplicity of the government.
this is
They use
misinformation,
reassuring
Ronan. What you're saying
language.
is
Sorry, let me
absolutely
finish the
untrue.
point.
Okay.
They use reassuring language about what they say this is about, but it's none of it in the bill. None of the reassurance, none of the safeguards are in
to
the
be
bill.
clear, Barry Ward, there has been concerns raised by the ICCL who've said that this legislation, yes, is necessary, but as it's worded, is a bit clumsy, particularly around this idea that you would have perhaps material in your possession, you know, even on your own home, in your laptop,
there's a couple of points there.
where perhaps
Firstly, the
it's unclear
ICCL
whether or not you intended to
The
publish
ICCL,
that.
the Irish Council for Civil Liberties, is in favour of this legislation.
But they say it's
they have.
clumsy.
Yes, they have made criticisms of the definition or lack thereof of hatred. The reason that hatred is not defined, or the term hate, because actually hatred is defined in Section 2, but the term hate
don't
is
mislead
is
people.
not defined.
It's
in-
not-
Hatred is
it's
defined
not-
as
it's
hatred.
not-
Have a look there.
Give
It's
us
in
a
Section
break.
2,
What does it say
subsection
about
B.
hatred?
It says it defines what type of hatred we're talking about.
It
But the
does
important
not.
point
It just talks
here
about
is-
against whom.
Yeah,
And that's the type
sorry.
of spiel that the government goes on
Yes,
with
okay,
constantly.
no, just to go back,
Please let
because
me
it is a
finish.
very important
It's a
point.
very
It does
important
not
point.
define
The
what
reason
hatred
that we
is.
do not say hate is X, Y, or Z is that if you say it's X, Y, or Z, a person in defending something they've done will say, well, it wasn't X, Y, and Z, it was W, or it was V. And if you give a finite definition, then
That's
you'll
the way
love
law is supposed to work, Barry.
No, it's not.
It's supposed to
actually,
leave people
Ronan.
knowing
Ronan,
what the
which is
limits are.
Which is why we have interpretation legislation. And there's a series of interpretation acts, and you know this, that tell us that where there is not a specific definition, and by the way, there's any number of laws where there are not specific and limited definitions. There are any number of laws where we say it has the ordinary meaning that we all understand hate or hatred to be. And the
Okay,
reason
some
you
of
don't
the
define it
concerns,
is that
though-
you create a way out
Okay.
of somebody who is
By the way,
doing
Kieran,
something.
what we
just
also
one
know-
second, Ronan, because I have had Lisa Chambers in the studio in recent weeks in the Fianna Fáil party, who has also raised real concerns around this piece of legislation. So it's not just coming from the opposition, it's not just coming from Michael McDowell, it's not just coming from the ICCL, it's coming from within the government parties.
Sorry, everybody is entitled to express their view and the opinion and to criticise on the bill and to criticise it and to seek to make changes. No, I don't agree with the concerns that they have expressed. And again, it comes back to the question I asked Ronan.
Defend, Barry?
Do you think it needs to be amended in any way, Barry? Sorry.
Is there anything
yes,
you wouldn't
and I
defend?
have put down amendments to the bill, and you heard Helen McEntee there saying to Claire on your interview that she will consider them, and she is considering them. And in fairness of all the ministers, she is somebody who accepts amendments from government and opposition on a frequent basis.
I don't know whether Michael McDowell has heard from her. I haven't heard about my concern.
While you continue in your vein of misinformation, you still haven't answered the question. You dodged it earlier. What is it you think people should be allowed to say that this bill will stop them from saying?
Anything that is robust but that doesn't harm people.
And it's specifically excluded.
No, it does not. And it is deliberately vague. It fails to define hatred. It introduces a radical new definition of gender, which takes us right into the middle of culture wars. That's what has many feminists concerned as well. It's a very broad range of opposition. But you will defend anything because you want to get your government's nomination.
Thank you very much for your time, and to you too, Barry Ward, for bringing it. We will return to this conversation, but that's it from us tonight, from all of the late team here. Good night. Do take care.